record this session to the cloud. And cool. Welcome to Tools for Thought Rocks. It's been a couple of months since we've had one of these online. Anyway, we did these, we were doing them monthly for a while, and we had one in person in New York City a little bit ago, but hopefully we're going to get back to a regular cadence of doing these. We've got this one today, and then also one coming up already scheduled for October, and then we'll schedule a couple more as well. Can you guys see my screen? Good. Cool. So a couple things about Tools for Thought Rocks. You probably already know this, but this is a group for people who are interested in using their computer to help them think better. So digital gardens, second brains, all these different terms around Tools for Thought. But this is a combination of people who are like creating some of these tools as well as using these tools to try and do things with their computers. So tips, techniques, usage, demos, all kinds of stuff. And a particular topic that we like to focus on is interchange, which is like what formats, code, techniques, standards, how can we actually have these tools talk to one another? And that's like a particular passion of a lot of the folks who are in this event. Most of the links are toolsforthought.rocks. You can most of what we do is through Luma. So if you're here, you're already a member of the Tools for Thought Rocks Luma group, and so you'll be able to get in. There'll be additional events and stuff will get posted through that. We do have a couple other links. We use the Fission Discord. Thank you, Fission, for providing that, and for also providing this Zoom link. We appreciate them. We use their Discord and a Tools for Thought channel there for some back channel between events. Not that you have to join that, but feel free to. Fission.code/Discord is the thing. Tools for Thought's the channel there. And then also all these events are recorded. So you can go to YouTube and go to Tools for Thought Rocks. And there's actually some really great talks from the past year or so of events. In fact, some of the speakers I see are in this room right now, which is really cool. And like I mentioned early on, we sometimes save the chat and put it on GitHub, but rather infrequently. And mostly what this is a monthly speaker series. What we're going to be doing today is talking about spatial canvases. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And sometimes we do in-person stuff like we did in New York. One thing I'll mention, just like logistically during the talk, you feel free to like raise your hand using Zoom. And I'm going to let Pirijan and Darlene kind of set the ground rules for their talks in terms of like, do they want to be interrupted, or would they like you to hold your questions to the end? People tend to, and so I'll let you guys, Darlene, Pirijan, you can say that at the beginning of your speech, like, or your talk, of like, please wait till the end to hold questions, or like, feel free to unmute and interrupt me. But once we get to the end, we'll have about 20 minutes for each talk, and then about 20 to 25 minutes for Q&A at the end. During that Q&A period, I'll just let you unmute and ask your questions. If you're not comfortable unmuting and asking your questions out loud, feel free to put them in chat, and I will ask them on your behalf. And so, yeah, this is a pretty informal group, and we've intentionally weighted it more towards discussion than talk so that we have time to like work through some of these ideas and talk about them together. All right. Quick introduction. We're talking to Spatial Canvases. This is going to be a series. We've got two different Spatial Canvas tools today. In October, probably in November and December, there's just a lot of Spatial Canvas, Infinite Canvas, spatial interface tools out there these days. And so we're going to do a series of talks on this, and this is the first one. And one of my beliefs is that sort of mediums, which I would consider Spatial Canvas sort of a medium, have a natural grain to them. There's like natural limitations. There's things that work in that medium, and there's things that don't work in that medium. And when we discover things about mediums, it's just like discovering something about a fact about the nature of the universe. Like it's that fundamental. And so as we're working, as all of us are sort of, or many of us are working with spatial canvases as tools, as we are creating ours, as some people here are creating them, they're also discovering things about the nature of the spatial canvas medium. And sometimes it's a generality about all spatial canvases. Sometimes it's a specific thing about when I use a spatial canvas for this specific workflow or domain, here's some things that work and don't work. So my goal for this time together and for the next several months with Tools for Thought is to create a space where people who can gather and kind of share what they're learning about spatial canvases, infinite canvases, and that kind of stuff. to that end, the Muse app team, if you go to twitter.com/museapphq, they dropped a resource just today. I think it's called Infinite Canvas. Remember, anybody, can someone drop the URL into chat if you know what I'm talking about? Let's see. Yeah, infinitecanvas.tools, which kind of like walks through some of the things about infinite canvases. And so that's a cool resource, and neat that it came out today. All right, but you didn't come here to hear me talk about mediums. We're here to let Pirijan and Darlene talk about some of their experiences. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Pirijan. Pirijan is, you can find him on Twitter at pketh.
My notes and highlight, and with one.
There we go. I'm going to mute you, Nikki. Pirijan is working on a tool called Canopio Club. Before this, he worked on a really cool tool called Glitch, which you'll kind of feel some of the art overlaps from the way that Glitch feels to the way that Canopio feels. But he's been working on Canopio for a little bit. Really great to follow Pirijan on Twitter. He does a great job of kind of showing his work in progress with little videos and snippets. Canopio lends itself well to sort of little video clips of the software under development. So it's been neat to see that develop. So definitely give him a follow on Twitter. And with that, I'll just turn it over to you, Pirijan.
Alrighty. I guess for that first part, you can feel free to interrupt as I'm going along. If this turns more into a conversation than a presentation, that's totally cool with me. Second thing is, how do I screen share? Let's see. Is it possible to just share like a portion of my screen?
Yes. In fact, that's what I was doing. If you go to share screen under basic, there's a section that says, or no, I'm sorry, it's under advanced. If you go to there's a portion of screen. It's the second option under advanced.
I gotta give permissions to Zoom because software.
Yep.
Let's see.
That one might mean you might have to restart.
Yeah, I'm gonna play it by ear and see what happens. I'm gonna like not restart. Is it working?
You're there. We can see you.
Nice. And can I? Yes, I can make this bigger. Nice. It's spatial unto itself. All right. Cool. So yeah, as Jeff mentioned, my name is Pirijan. You can find me in various places. And I make Kinopio, which is a tool for thought. Kinopio, I'll kind of go into a really brief overview in a sec, but all these documents that you make with Kinopio can be public if you so choose, and this one happens to be public. So I'm going to drop this link into Slack or into Zoom once I figure out how to do that. What happened to the Slack Zoom window?
Yeah, once you share your screen, it moves around just to mess with you. There's there'll be like a top bar or a bottom bar for Zoom that has all the controls on it.
Oh, okay, cool. And then if one of these chat. Oh, here we go. All right.
And it looks like Command Shift H is the, there you got it.
Okay, I found it through the UI. It took a while, but okay, cool. So you can jump in here. You can watch me move around. You can look at it yourself. But yeah, I was the co-creator of Glitch when I worked at Fog Creek. Fog Creek Software is a company that it's kind of like a research incubator, or they were. They made Trello, they made Stack Overflow, and Glitch was the third thing. And I was kind of hired to do R&D and lead the design of that. And about 3 years ago, I started Canopio, which is a spatial tool for thought. Well before I knew what that word meant and that there was a whole community around these things, I'll kind of explain how I jumped into this world. But in a nutshell, Canopio lets you click, add a card, representing a thought or whatever. You can press enter to add more. You can drag your cards around, pretty standard stuff. But you might notice that each card has these persistent little connector buttons, and that lets you connect ideas to other cards. So the basic premise is add ideas and thoughts to work through a problem anywhere on a page. With the lowest friction possible. You can even create them that way. New idea, and kind of organize things later by yourself or collaboratively. And you can also kind of select multiple things and edit them, turn them into tasks and whatnot, or remove them. So I've checked that off, and I'll go on. So kind of the initial thinking behind this was. kind of observing myself, like when I worked, I was kind of a designer and a developer, but I kind of noticed that, and I'll switch to some design files that I have open, that while I was kind of designing things, I would like write notes in the margins with the text tool for myself to know what I was doing, but also to kind of like help me later on when I had to, explain design work to other people. This is something I did, with some consulting work that I did a year ago. This is something I did kind of doing the earlier planning of Kinopio. Just visually, and yeah, the other kind of observation that led me to kind of want to explore like the spatial canvas is noticing, like, while I was working, it was really hard for people to write good specs. Spec document is something that kind of lays out from an engineering perspective what kind of work we're going to do, like what kind of feature should we build, why should we build it, and all that. And it's kind of like, it's a pretty standard thing, but what's standard is that these documents are often like pretty dry, pretty hard to read when they shouldn't be. And kind of my insight there is that like writing is pretty hard. And part of that problem is that computers don't do a great job with making, like, helping us express ourselves. There's like this big gap between a written document and the thoughts in our head, and there's kind of nothing in between. And kind of that in between world requires like a lot of like expertise and a lot of like skill and experience. And maybe there's something kind of between that, kind of is a low friction way to get ideas out and turn them into something. So yeah, I guess that kind of references the two ways to build approach that I think products often have. There's the top-down sort of research, explore prior art, what else is in this space. And a lot of tools are kind of based on like Photoshop or based on Visio. They kind of have those roots in tools like that, where you have a toolbar, you pick, oh, I want the sticky note, or I want the square tool or whatever. But where I started was kind of from a more primitive place of what is the quickest way to get an idea onto the screen, wherever you want to get it, and then write that idea down. So yeah, I kind of, and so the third thing I kind of wanted to figure out, or needed to figure out before I started building Canopio, was, can I build it? Like, is it a skill thing? Is it this is a possibility on the web? So I built a lot of prototypes, pictured here, that kind of show the earliest versions of connecting cards. And if you click this little card here, which is like a comment card, you can find a link to more of my really early prototypes. You just have to scroll really far down to the bottom of the page. And so I guess the heart of my talk is about what I learned and what I'm still trying to figure out while building Canopio. And I think kind of from my approach of like building and iterating and doing that publicly and kind of like doing that kind of with a community, a couple things that I wouldn't have thought originally kind of occurred to me. One thing that I'm noticing is that a thinking tool is not really like a single job tool, which is what I kind of initially thought. Like I thought it's a whiteboarding tool, or it's a note-taking tool. You kind of take your notes, you make your whiteboard, and then you bounce. And that might be true for like a business tool, where a business could justify, like, we use this tool for one thing, but it saves us X amount of time or whatever. Let's buy it. But subscription software for consumers, I feel like there's more of an emphasis or more of a need for people to feel like they can do a lot in this tool. They can do their to-dos in here, the grocery tasks. They can plan things out with friends, and a bunch more besides, mood boards and all the rest. And so I guess that's kind of why personalization is you might notice this board looks a little funky, the backgrounds, all the colors, all the rest. But by default, boards actually have a little bit more of a minimalist look. And you can add a background, and you can even tint that background. It's hard to see on a dark background, but I'll do that on a light background. And you can drag pictures in. I can do that right now with this picture of a couch on my desktop, and of course resize things. So yeah, personalization, and like I feel like that's what I've noticed is that's been one of those what's the word? One of those like high, like lower effort. It's still a lot of work, but it's way less effort to add personalization. And like people really kind of react strongly to it. Like it's one of those things that resonates with people. So I like to do that. I kind of feel like I'm in a place between personalization type features and fixing the debt that some of those things cause. And there's like a tricky balance between how much personalization, you know, you want it to feel like you can make it yours, but you don't want people to be paralyzed with choice. And also, as you'll see in every like pro advanced or thing where you have power users, is that you get requests that you didn't even know were a thing. So Canopio has the ability to add backlinked tags, you know, the same sort of syntax you might use in Rome or something. Again, I made Canopio way before I knew about any of this world, and sort of added it. So in this case, there's an ongoing tag. I have that same tag in another space, and I can click on that and open the card immediately with that tag on it. So I can jump back. And here we go. So let's see. The next point I wanted to make, let's check this off, is that there is a relationship between thinking and sharing. Actually, this one, it's kind of hard for me to put into words, but I'll do my best. But I feel like when you're kind of like the traditional realm of a thinking tool is like, this is a thing for me, it's a personal space. And when you make new spaces in Canopio, they're private by default for that reason. But there's also like a lot of really great use cases where a thinking tool that's kind of shareable and collaborative kind of opens up like possibilities that like your traditional productivity style tool, like a Google Docs or whatever, doesn't, just because of the personal nature of it. Even if you don't customize any of the background, it's very active. Moving a thing around is more personal than, you know, writing in a document where things can only look a certain way. That's a lot more prescribed. And so, yeah, to that end, there are sharing options. You can make a space that anyone can edit. You can make a space that's private, and in the private space, you can invite people specifically to that space to be collaborators. Let's see. And I think I remember, Jeff, you mentioned that export was kind of a big deal in interop and all the rest of it. I haven't really found the holy grail of export, just because all of these kind of spatial canvas tools are very different. A lot of them are kind of make assumptions where you have a single tree that works really great for OPML. In Kinopio, you can have trees that are just orphans and not connected to things. You can have trees that kind of are cyclical. And you know, you can have directions and they can be annotated or not. That's what the little animation kind of implies. So yeah.
Sorry, man.
Oh,
sorry, no.
Oh, okay, that wasn't the question. All right. For the text questions, I guess I'll do them after, because it's hard for me to watch a chat and talk at the same time. But feel free to jump in with word questions if you've got them. In the other kind of export options that I kind of have are, you know, you can embed a kind of representation of the space inside of another document. And you've got plain text exporting, you can save as PDF, and then there's the JSON backup version, the full representation of the space. But yeah, I definitely think there's a lot more kind of work to do in this world, in the export side of things.
Yeah, I think that's the whole thing is no one has found the holy grail of export. No one has. And so I think that's why it's an interesting and open challenge that everyone is dealing with separately. I think separate, you showed some of the features. I'm curious, are there times where you actually feel like frustrated in that you have something that you want to get into Canopio that you feel like you can't get into Canopio, and conversely, you're like, oh no, all that information's trapped in Canopio and I need it over here. Like, what are some
that makes okay. So I guess to answer the first part of that, the getting information in, I actually kind of just created like a browser extension and an inbox system where, you know, like wherever you are on the web, you know, you can quickly ingest a URL or a thought, and that'll all go to an inbox. This is my inbox. It's pretty messy, but the idea is you put things into an inbox, you process them, you might move them to another space. I'll move them to our talk space. And then do something with them there. In terms of getting information out, like I think part of the problem that makes export so difficult is there's so many reasons to export. Especially with Canopio, people might use their Canopio space as like the launching pad to a spec document or a traditional type of document. They might want to make a presentation from that. They might want to make a mood board from that, or just a website from that. And a lot of those, like, there's no one import format for both the presentation and a document, for example, or presentation in a wiki. Import format to a wiki. So I think that also like makes export difficult in the sense that a lot of times when we talk about export, we talk about exporting between tools for thought, but we don't really think about exporting as part of a workflow to another tool. And so I guess right now, I don't know what the status quo is, but I would imagine that it's like on a per service basis. So I might build an export for Google Docs or build an export for Trello or whatever. But it's kind of like not really a great like solution. It's kind of like just brute forcing the problem and hoping that your user kind of uses one of those tools and one of those blessed integrations. But Canopio, kind of as a release valve, has a fully documented API where basically everything you can do in a space you can do with the API. So I've seen people use like iOS shortcuts and things like that to do things that they can't necessarily do through the UI, as well as exporting and searching in, you know, like more elaborate ways. So yeah, that's kind of where I am on the export world. The other kind of observation is that thinking leads to doing, and I feel like that's like the most virtuous cycle, and that's why checkboxes are kind of a first-class feature. You can check them off in the UI, or you can create checkboxes in the UI. You can just type, you know, that syntax and have a checkbox. I think, yeah, that's something that doesn't get really talked about a lot. I think on one world, you've got like the productivity world, the to-do list world, and the more corporate stuff like a Jira or whatever. But then on the other hand, you have a thinking tool, which is we kind of both aesthetically and also like software design wise put it in an academic, like austere world where it's like, oh, you don't have to do things, you're thinking. But I think sometimes it's good to do both. All right. I guess the next part was kind of like more of an experimental tool slash feature of the product where if you've ever used Glitch, you'll know that it has like it's a web development tool, and it has like a web editor, you know, kind of looks like a CodePen or any of the other IDEs, but it also has this like community site where you can see projects and other things. What I think is kind of like a weakness of the app is that those are two separate worlds. You kind of have to choose, oh, I'm going to look through the community or I'm going to build. And I feel like you can kind of combine them both in a more integrated way, assuming that the scale isn't like Facebook scale or anything. But anyways, you as a user, you can add spaces that you're particularly proud of to this Explorer list. You do that by clicking here, and there are little controls that make sure that you're not adding something that has like one card, or it's hard to have like objective representations of quality. So in addition to checks like that, there's like a moderation email that goes out to me, and I kind of manually check each one. But I do want to have like the ability to more quantitatively say like what is a quote unquote good space, or a space that might be interesting to people. And it doesn't have to be super coherent. It might just represent someone experimenting with the app and trying something new, or trying out a feature. And that's cool. I think it's just stuff that people who are into using the tool find interesting, kind of self-referential. And there's also this feature that shows you spaces that are being edited publicly or being viewed publicly by other people. So it's a kind of way to make what is like a soft way or soft touch way to make what's usually thought of as a solo tool feel a little more social without really cramming the social into the experience and kind of ruining it, which I find is kind of a tough balance. Let's see. Oh, and yeah, another thing that I feel like is obvious to me building a tool or using Kinopio is that bulk actions are just as important as regular, you know, single move actions. And I think part of that, or part of why that feels right to me, is because in the real world, if you have a stack of paper on the desk, I can choose to pick one up at a time, or I can just brush my hand against the whole surface and move them all together. And I think with, you know, traditional tools, you know, if you think of a list in a database or whatever, or even with Gmail, bulk edit is like a special mode that you enter into. And, you know, like anything that kind of takes away from the fluidity of interacting with a thinking tool is time you spend thinking about the tool and not thinking about what you want to be doing and your thoughts and whatnot. So that's why you've got paint select. If you want something more quick and conventional, you can hold shift to do a box select. But paint select lets you do like, weird selections that you couldn't necessarily do with a box. And the last thing that I've kind of learned is that coming from a world of conventional software companies where you make the feature, then a marketing person does the announcement and everything's like, we did this and we can't wait to see what you'll make with this or whatever. Software building as a solo creator feels more like I'm just a YouTuber, or just is the wrong word, but I am more closely related to an independent content creator than I am to a software company developer. And like a lot of the same sort of things of sharing your work in public and creating content apply in that way. And I find it really useful to the kind of enabling part of that is people can build trust with you a lot more than they can with a company, and you use your own voice in it. One of my pet peeves is when people say like, we built this, and it's a one-person company, because you're kind of squandering an opportunity to kind of connect closer with your audience, with your users. Let's see. And so I guess, there's stuff that I'm still figuring out that I think is a little more interesting. And maybe this is like, there's a QA section. I'm sure there are questions, but maybe these are questions that I can ask you. So when I think of, the world of tools for thought, it does seem like a niche. Like this is like, if you just, one of the problems that I have, and problems is a strong word, but one of the situations I find myself in is explaining to people in the real world what I do. And I often say, I make a brainstorming tool or whatever. Because if I say I make a thinking tool or a tools for thought, I feel like people's eyes glaze over and it's like, okay, sure, whatever. As a person who uses productivity tools or thinking tools or makes thinking tools, how do you explain that to people in the real world who maybe aren't plugged into this side of software or aren't necessarily software or tool enthusiasts? The other thing I'm kind of figuring out is the relationship between thinking and productivity, productivity tools, that is. I think we understand what a productivity tool is, like people know what a doc is, people know what a spreadsheet is, et cetera, et cetera. But where does is a thinking tool kind of like part of that, or is that like part of that flow, or should it be considered as a totally separate thing in the same way that a drawing tool is not considered a productivity tool? But at the same time, we all kind of know what a drawing tool is just because of the history of drawing tools being a lot longer. And I've also noticed that there are two ways that people use thinking tools. Some people use them to like build a corpus of information. Here's my second brain, everything's backlinked and interweaved. And other people write to just figure things out now. When you move things spatially, it kind of connects a little closer with your brain, helps with short-term recall and things like that. And I wonder if there are tools that kind of explicitly say that we are for one type of thinking or we are for another, or just how people see that kind of as whether that's the same thing, whether that's the same person, whether it's not. And I guess those are the big things. I do kind of think about when it's the right time to do an innovative thing and when it's the best time to like do something conventional. So we have conventions that I think are like for spatial tools. I feel like the biggest convention we have is design applications, like our like Visio and things like that. But also for normal people, it's their computer desktop. You can make a box selection, you can select icons, drag them around or whatever. And I think for a lot of people, that's their most spatial kind of everyday experience. And when do you kind of conform to that, and when you kind of diverge from that? It's something I feel like I feel more than I know, or more than I like have like a standard of rigor to apply to. And I wonder if anyone's thought through that and has any thoughts on that. So those are my questions for you. And now it's time for you guys to ask me questions if you want. Thanks.
That was awesome. Great job Pirijan. Like lots to jump off of there. So I have questions, but I'll see if anybody else wants to jump in first before I pepper you with questions and thoughts. Oh, actually, Pirijan, I will ask the 2 follow-up ones that I sent you via Twitter, because you
right.
explicitly touch on them. Just what have you found great about spatial canvases? Like what kinds of workflows have been like, this is so much better than spatial. If I had to do this in a document, it would, I'd be really frustrated. And then also like what has not worked? You're like, I tried to do this in spatial and it was just a disaster. Like I gave up and I went back to fill in tool here.
Cool. Yeah, actually, I brought up, somebody posted on the Kinopio Discord about a kind of success story they had with spatial planning, and I thought I'd pull that up here to share. But basically, in a nutshell, they found that the spatialness of it gave them a lot more perspective than a linear format. They were kind of previously using Notion to plan an art event, and I find that's one of the biggest ones is being able to kind of see information in 3 dimensions as opposed to 2, like a top-down format, gives you the opportunity to kind of, just see your information in a different way. And especially when you collaborate with people, I think it's just like a lot more fun and tangible. And I think that's what's missing from a lot of productivity tools. There's kind of this divide between a real life tool like a hammer or something. It's pretty fun to use and fulfilling, but you can't get too much work done in an office with a hammer, unfortunately. And versus the other world of very abstract feeling software, which is very like, you just feel like you're a drone at a computer desk. And I think a spatial tool has the ability to kind of bridge both of those worlds.
That's great.
Yeah, the other advantage of a spatial tool is just that it encourages you. I think somebody might have mentioned this in the chat, but I'm still catching up to it. But that you're not encouraged to necessarily define a structure up front. And so by being really malleable, a spatial kind of thinking experience lets you reach conclusions that you wouldn't necessarily have gotten to if you were sort of led by some sort of initial structure that you're forced to make.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Did I miss? Oh yeah, for the second part of your question, which was what are things people can't do? I don't really hear too much about that. Like, I think I might be the one that suggests to people that like the thing they're trying to do might be a better fit for, let's say, a spreadsheet. People want to compare rows of information or even do like math and processing on it. There are spatial tools that do kind of try and bridge that gap and let you do programming in a spatial way. I think one is called, oh damn it, Nato, I think, or Nato.
Yeah, Nato by Paul Shin, Fermat by, in fact, Fermat, Paul from Fermat, not Paul from Nato. Paul from Fermat is going to speak in October.
Oh, great.
So we'll get to kind of, he'll show off what I call a computation, or what he's calling a computational canvas, so that where you can actually write code and process and stuff inside the canvas, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, and that stuff is super cool. I guess, but it's a very different audience, I think, that are looking for programmatic tools. But yeah, so there's a lot you can do. I think it's more a limit. I think it's not necessarily a limitation of the medium, spatialness versus not. It's more the limitation of the particular implementation of how that spatial canvas functions. I think one of the biggest limitations might be just a sense of scale. Some tools like address that, where if you click on a card, you can add comments, you can add you can nest information down so that the top view is very clean. But I feel like that's kind of like a false economy, in the sense of you kind of quickly lead to feeling like you don't understand what's kind of on the page anymore, that you have to click into each one. And that things kind of can't scale is kind of an advantage of a tool like this. You can kind of grab a little bit of scale by zooming, but at the same time, like knowing when things are too big and too much knowing when to stop is kind of it kind of stops you from entering into this kind of rabbit hole where, like, if you use a lot of traditional productivity software like to-do lists and stuff, you kind of feel like, oh, I've entered way too much information. I can't, no matter how much I kind of tend to the information, I can't really, like, I'll always feel like I'm trying to climb out of a black hole, and the only option is to declare bankruptcy and nuke the whole thing from orbit and try again. I think spatial the spatial approach kind of prevents that situation from happening.
Yeah, that's interesting in that a spatial is it occupies space. And so when things
Exactly.
occupy space, there are limitations to how much you can put in the space before you run into some problems. That's so interesting. One thing
Yeah,
I
it's a
heard,
disadvantage and an advantage. Mhm.
yeah, it's the nature of the medium, right? Like it can be to an advantage, it can be to a disadvantage as well. One thing I thought I heard you say, and it has me thinking about other limitations, is it feels like a Canopio board is either a place where you go to, like maybe a limitation or a something that we don't use spatial canvases for is that they're not a deliverable in themselves, right? There's something you might use as a prop to speak or to like collaborate, or so not to speak, to think for yourself, or you might use it to collaborate with a small group, but it's like an intermediate thing. And then there's a deliverable that you would deliver to other people in some other format, and it's not going to be the canvas itself.
I think particularly in a business situation, that's usually the case. Like there are people who use Kinopio for work, but for whatever reason, like they know their audience wants a specific format. Like that's why a lot of times, like even though you have tools like Notion, people are still making PowerPoints to like express something that should be an email. But I guess that's the second point. But like, yeah, there are these kind of conventional formats that the world kind of wants. But I think there's like, especially because Canopio is a tool on the web and it lets you essentially make web pages. There are people who use the tool in creative ways, which I think is really cool. People, mood board, like a lot of that stuff is kind of inside of the explore menu. Let's see if I can find one. Somebody just put a gallery of photos up. That's kind of cool. People have shared vacation stories this way. So it can be the end like result of work. But a lot of times, yeah, it is kind of like a chain, like a tool in the tool chain.
Yeah, cool. Do anyone else have any questions? I've been following the chat, and there's been a lot of interesting conversations in the chat, but no like direct questions that I've seen. It's interesting, before you brought up the divide between sort of productivity and thinking, there was a little back channel conversation around that as well, of like people saying that's hard to do. Should we even want to do that? Bill, go ahead.
Couple questions, one of which I might have missed when you were talking about it. You were showing a little bit of the kind of wiki linking of, double square brackets to refer to things. Was that to link to other objects in the current canvas or to link to a different canvas? Because
so it's kind of,
go ahead.
You can use it for the same or other canvases.
Okay, because I noticed some of your canvas URLs look like UUIDs as opposed to human-friendly pet names or something. So I was just trying to understand how you work with like multiple canvases.
Yeah, so every canvas has a URL, and the URL has like a human-friendly bit of it, but then it also has a UUID appended to the end. And I can get into that, why that is later if you're interested. Yeah, basically that means you can just drop a link anywhere, even within the same, like a different space. And so I can go to a different space, I can paste my link in there, and it turns into a friendly link here because I have permission to read that space. I guess we all do because I made it public, and you can use that to jump to that space. You can also quick link like this by clicking the / command and it's choosing one of your spaces, and then jumping to it from there. But yeah, tags work across all your information, everything you have access to. If it's got a tag, then you see it in the list.
And another question is, there was some discussion in the chat about the challenges of to-do lists. When you were talking about the fact that you can have sort of a check-off status for every card that's in here. I was wondering if there's any other structure you have for the to-dos within a canvas or to-dos across canvases, or whether it's really just sort of like almost a UI, affordance that's very local and tangible, but not really meant to be scaled out as a, like, now I have a report of to-dos and when they're due and crap like that, which I don't personally need anyway, but some people do. So I just wanted to get your thinking around how that stuff plays.
So it is definitely the local, like very simple, it's just a text annotation type of thing that's decorated in the UI. I think for people who do have like really advanced needs for reporting or whatever, that's what the API is for. Like the API kind of sets me free to focus on the features that kind of benefit more people and just like the everyday thinking experience, and not necessarily go too far the rabbit hole of a single person's particular need.
Yeah.
Oh, and a structure that I have added though, and it's also kind of not necessarily for to-do lists, but it is a way to structure information within a space, is this concept of boxes, where you click the box button, you can draw a box, you can name it, and cards that you put inside of a box move with the box. So that kind of thing is like an organizing, you know, primitive that you can use.
That's a nice little feature, actually. Reminds me of like frames and that kind of stuff in Figma. Related to the API, Brian Adam did ask a question in chat about that. So he was saying, he says, I've often thought that an export is often more about a different way to view your data. Like I want to look at this data in a different format. Can you talk about how dynamic your API is to allow your audience to build new views of the Canopio data?
So the API is like very agnostic to what you do with it. So if you wanted to hypothetically build a view of one of your spaces, like if you want to turn this into a linear text list or put it into a spreadsheet, you would use the get space route, and that would include a list of your cards, and you can process those cards in any way that you see fit. So yeah, what you do in terms of how you want to view your data is completely up to you with the API. You can also query individual cards and things like that too.
Yeah, I think he might have been, I'm reading in a little bit here, but I think he might have been asking more about also about the dynamic nature of it, of like, do you get like webhooks when things are created? Like is there, you know what I'm saying? Like I can, yes, you can query, but like, how do you have a dynamic view that's updated as I'm doing things in
So right now, unfortunately, you just have to do things the dumb way and poll on them at intervals or click a button to refresh the data. There's no webhooks and whatever. That's something I'd love to add in the future. It's just more a matter of time than anything.
Cool. That makes sense.
That definitely makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's Adam said thanks in the chat in case you didn't see it, but the sounds like that answered his question. But yeah, yeah, it's nice to have that robust API for, and I really like what you were saying about like exports tend to be associated with specific workflows. Like we shouldn't even really think about like a generic export, especially with something as flexible as a spatial canvas where there's no sort of well understood underlying file format for a spatial canvases. And so in other words, like the things you would want to pull out of that would be specific to the sort of the place that the spatial canvas information is going to go to, or the workflow that it's a part of. It's an interesting thing. And it like makes me want to muse about, or like the hot take would be, when you're talking about export, you're never actually talking about export. Like export, you're always talking about something else, and it's figuring out what the something else is. That's the hard part.
Yeah. And I mean, they might change like in the future as we build more Canvas-like tools and we kind of build a set of conventions or understand them better over time. But right now, it just feels like such a nascent space. I know there are players that have been in the space for a long time, like Mirror or whatever. But yeah, I feel like there's a lot more experimentation to be done, and setting some sort of export format in stone, you know, could have the opposite effect of actually stifling innovation.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. I see one more question from Brian in the chat. How are you handling information in spaces getting stale? I find the hardest problem with all the tools is I make spaces and pages, but information moves too fast to keep everything updated.
It's hard for me to think of what you mean. Like, could you give me an example of like an information that needs to get updated and how it gets stale? Like, is it information that can be tracked with an API, or is it from another app, or just like a real life event?
I think this relates to one of the things, Pirijan, you were saying while he's typing. He's saying just in general, things change. This relates to one of your findings, or the things that you've understood, is that people really want to spend a lot of time in these tools. right? It's not just, it's not just a one-off thing that you do once and then don't come back for months. It's that people actually kind of live in that tool such that they're if they're going to actually use it, they're going to spend a lot of time there, and they're going to be continually sort of moving things around, updating things, that kind of stuff. But
And I think I mean, this is a general thinking tool / collaboration where / documentation problem that's always existed. Like, you're in the context of creating a product and designing it, and you're having a meeting to talk about one particular set of topics that relates across a bunch of different things. And then how do you integrate those decisions and notes and ideas back into sort of your core fundamental documents so that that's sort of your source of truth across meetings and things. It's kind of an almost impossible problem without constantly being in librarian mode and not actually getting anything done. So I think the granularity of a Canvas model, I think doubles, it makes it more obvious that that's an unsolved problem. Like it makes the pain so obvious that you are forced to acknowledge it.
Totally. And also I think updating a Canvas is maybe easier than updating a doc in terms of if we're thinking of here are all the decisions we've made, blah, 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 and the thinking that led to it. Being able to follow a chain and then add on to a chain and addendum is a little easier than looking through a linear document, being which is the place that we talked about the thing. It just requires a little bit more parsing. So yeah, I definitely agree that you still kind of need to be in librarian mode, but at least the burden of librarian mode is a little less.
yeah,
Potentially.
Well, Pirijan, thanks for showing off Canopio and sharing some of the stuff you've learned. At this time, I'm
My
going
pleasure.
to jump over to Edvo. And so I met Darlene in New York City when I was up there for the BetaWorks Render conference in, I guess this was back in August or July. I can't remember now. But yeah, one of the things that was cool about meeting Darlene is we were sitting together during the event, and she was actually taking notes during the event of the event itself and in Edvo. And so I got to kind of watch her watch over her shoulder while she was using Edvo to take notes about the event. And I thought it was interesting to kind of, I don't know, I feel like all of these tools that we're talking about, it was even interesting, Pirijan, watching how quickly you were able to change backgrounds, add cards, move things around. All these tools yield to virtuosity. You actually have to learn how to use the tools and use them well. What are the things I can do? Where are the buttons? That kind of stuff. Watching an experienced user is very, very different from playing with the tool for the first time. If that's what when you're first trying one of these things out. So it's cool to watch Darlene going through Edvo. I know she's working in product with Edvo, helping them build some stuff. And from talking with her and talking with the CTO at Edvo, they have pretty ambitious plans for that. So look forward to what she's going to be sharing today.
Yeah, totally. So I guess high level at Edvo, we really believe that the next revolution in computing will be personal intelligence. So the same way everyone has a personal computer or multiple personal computers now, we have a thesis that everyone will have a personal database that augments them wherever they are. So of course, in order to even get to personal intelligence, we need to make it easy for people to just bring in all of their siloed and scattered data into one place and make it more interoperable so your data can communicate with each other. So we're starting with the Spatial Canvas that just sits on top of your personal database. And the goal here is to help people really visualize everything that they're working across in their knowledge, as well as just make it more usable. So I thought a fun meta thing to share with y'all, let me share the screen, is my tools for thought space. Right. Does everyone see my screen? Okay, perfect. So in Edvo, everything is a space. So a space is really what you think of as your canvas or your board, and be dedicated to any topic. This is my tools for thought space. I use Edvo for essentially everything now. We're really dog fooding the product heavily in the team. So all of my product management things, all of my like personal knowledge management, learning management, everything like that lives in Edvo. And so in my tools for thought space, this is your canvas, and you can see I have kind of like organized it in a way of like a dashboard that goes down and breaks down into multiple different layers. So I have my resources section. Anything you see with like tags underneath means like, hey, something's living in this card. Everything you see in Edvo is a card. These are image cards. These are note outline cards. We even have what we call browser cards. So these are dynamic iframes that you can use directly within Edvo. So if I wanted to like click around, for example, this is a Tools for Thought Discord. I can use this the same exact way I'd be able to use that in my Chrome browser. So everything in Edvo is a space. Any
Darlene,
item you see in your
interrupt?
space is a card. Yes.
Can I interrupt you for a second? So I noticed you just showed
Go
off
for it.
iframe embedding of a Discord channel. Do you actually spend time working in other applications embedded in iframes, or is it more just like a visual reference of like, remember this is here?
So I actually use them within Edvo, unless it's like a Figma, something that's like really detail oriented that I have to be like completely focused on, then I'll use that outside of Edvo. But a lot of the things I bring into Edvo, I actually use. So for things like Discord or even Slack, because everything in Edvo is interconnected, if I'm working in a space and I don't want to like leave the space that I'm in, I'll just like bring in my Slack, send the message I need to send, and then remove it. So it's like, I'm going to stay in my environment, stay in the context that I'm in without getting distracted. Kind of like when you go up to your, yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. Very cool. I love how quick that was to bring that in. That was impressive.
Yeah, but I mean, what you're saying about like an experienced user versus a beginning user, that's something that we're definitely working on with our onboarding and making everything discoverable.
Well, I apologize, I interrupted
exactly.
you. So you were talking about
no worries
in your dashboard.
Yeah. So everything in Edvo is considered, any item you see in your space is considered a card. The reason why that is because everything here is modular. You can essentially put anything in your space can exist in any other space, as many other spaces as you want. And the reason we have this is because everything that you're using should be reusable, so that you never have to start from scratch. So example, there is same thing like that Slack window that I had, I can bring that into every other space without needing to like bring it in from like my browser every single time. It already exists in any space I need it to. The other type of card that we have is what we call portals. So a portal is essentially a space within a space. So this is my tools for thought space. And then I have a separate tool space that I have essentially like embedded in here. It's similar to how you would think of like frames or boxes, like in Canopio, except since it's its own space and entity, you can connect it again to any other space. So again, like reusing these frames, reusing these boxes. So you see my tool space in my tools for thought space. In these portals, I can interact with anything within it. So again, that zoomable interface. And you can even have a portal within a portal. So let's see, I think this has a portal within a portal. So I can zoom in here. We're still working on more of the UI so that like if it comes to a certain threshold, it should freeze. And then zooming in more like that. So we're still working on how we can have more of that zoomable interface, but the idea is being able to easily transition into different cards as you're going in a smooth way. So that it works the way your mind works, where it's continuously just going down these paths without trying to remove as much friction as possible. So the cool thing about portals is that you can drag and drop things into portals. They're completely interactable. And again, this is so that you can stay in your current environment while bringing in any new context that you have. Okay. So everything in Edvo is interconnected. What I mean by that, or how we demonstrate that, is by tags. So you'll notice that everything in a space is auto bidirectionally linked back to this bigger space that it's in. So any item in this Edvo space is linked to this bigger space so that you'll always know where to find it. And whenever it is somewhere else, you'll be able to get back to here. And then you can drill down, just as you can like drill down into specific portals, you can also drill down into any card. So cards can have as many layers as you want within Edvo. An example of that, let's see, something that has more of a path. Since we were just talking about the render event where we met, I'm going to go into this portal. I'm going to jump into this topic space. This is the space I was taking notes on that Jess was looking over my shoulder at. And anywhere you see these cards, or these tags under a card tells you, hey, there is stuff in that card. So it's just giving you more context into what exists. So I just keep drilling down, jumping down into these different cards, and it just gives me more context. So every card has a visualization of like, hey, this is a summary of what's in here. And then you can just keep jumping down deeper and deeper and deeper. And then of course you can use the tags at the top to jump back out. Okay, what else should I show you? So the workflow that I use this for, like obviously this is a built out space, but it didn't start this way. I started with just having a tools for thought space. I brought things in so you can copy the URL, paste it into your space. And that's how you bring web pages in. You can drag and drop images, files, and things like that. But it really just started with this bigger tools for thought space, bringing things in, realizing that like, oh, now I can start to put these into different buckets in a way, and organizing it in that sense. So like even today during Pirijan's demo, you know, I was taking notes on Kinopio, and I just put that in the bigger tools for thought space. But eventually, you know, I'll probably be like, okay, this is a tool, so I'm just going to drag and drop it into this tools portal and leave it there. Let me zoom in more so you guys can see that. No, don't want to create that. Yeah, so the main concept of Edvo is really how can we help people interconnect all of their data together? How do we make it in a way that's easy for people to visualize and actually use their data across? So just like in Dropbox, you can bring in all of your data, all of your information, but it's really hard to use it in that environment. So with Edvo, we are thinking about what kind of environments can we create where you can not only have all your data in one place, interconnect it all, but also use it. So right now we're working on the UI and making everything feel more intuitive, and just thinking about the balance of, hey, how do we give people all the context they need in order to work across their data without making it overwhelming, making it easy to have all that context in one place, but also to focus and be able to get work done. I think there's a very it's a very sensitive balance that we'll have to figure out, but those are some fun problems that we're trying to work on right now.
Awesome. Darlene, Johannes in the chat asked a question. How do you deal with a situation where a user deletes or archives a card that's embedded in many different spaces? Are you just removing the reference, or does like the actual card go away everywhere? Or, you know, what, you know, how do you distinguish between removing the card from the current place that it is versus removing it from all places?
Yeah, okay, so let me give you an example. Let's link to like a billion things. No, I'll just link this to a bunch of stuff. Let's put that. All right, so there's not actually like an archive in the direct space yet. We call it unlinking this item. So it essentially just like untags the item from your current space, but it will still appear in any other space that it lives in. So that's kind of how we deal with that right now. Our archival feature only lives in the timeline because we haven't really thought out what kind of UI or workflow we want to create there. But if you were to archive this, then like it will no longer appear in all of those spaces. We're thinking of having maybe a modal pop-up be like, hey, this is going to remove it from X amount of spaces. Are you sure you want to do that? Or do you just want to unlink it from a specific space? So that's why in a specific space, it will only be untagged essentially when you do that. So I can unlink it, which untags it from this space. But if I look at, see, I think I put it in here.
What if you keep going around and unlinking it everywhere? Like you like track it down and unlink. Does it like implicitly get archived at that point?
No. So anything that's untagged in Edvo, aka it's not like connected to anything else, still lives in your Edvo database. It's still searchable. So I could like look for it and bring it up in your search. Yeah. So everything still exists until you archive it.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so you really, for Edvo, I almost need a different mental model of like, and you've been saying, you've said this maybe 5 times, and it's starting to dawn on me now. There's a database, and then there's spatial canvases that are presenting that data in various places.
Yeah.
The unlink was actually, Johannes in the chat said, very cool. Thanks for explaining. I think that walking through how you did that actually helped me to understand the mental model, like as opposed to you saying it over and over again of like, this is a database, and then we're helping you present that database in different canvases. It's like seeing that, oh, it can be presented all over the place, but when I unlink it, it removes it from this canvas, but it's still there. I can even unlink it everywhere, and then I can still search for it because it's still there in the database. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. I mean, we started with a visual canvas because it helped us as a team at least be able to make sense of everything we were trying to figure out as we were building this product. So kind of meta in that way.
Right.
But we really do believe that there will be, different visual modalities. Like if I wanted to see this in a canvas spatial type form, but sometimes seeing things in lists is more convenient. Seeing things as a graph is more convenient. So really working towards, how are we able to just shape and manipulate the data that we're using in a way that makes the most sense for us as we're thinking.
Pirijan asks a potentially very fun question here. He says, possibly technical question. It looks like links and portals are iframes with live data, which is very cool. One part of the question is not as much fun, but is there any performance overhead to having too many of them open on your canvas at the same time? And then I'll ask the second part, which is way more fun.
Yeah, so not
like
yet.
Does your browser just slow down once you get a whole bunch of these on a single canvas?
So we've been really working on like performance on like memory leaks. So when we first started building Edvo and put it, ability for iframes, the answer was yes. We challenge all of our users to like push the limits and see how many iframes work until it starts like crashing. I have not experienced yet, but I also have, a pretty powerful computer. So right now, since we are in a closed beta and onboarding like 1 to 5 people a week, we ask like, okay, what is your RAM space? What kind of compute device are you using? So we can better understand if it's bogging down for certain people, like what's the limit? So we're kind of still discovering that at some point. But with iframes, there's like, I feel like there's no doubt going to be some sort of limit. We're just trying to define it a bit more right now.
Got it.
Oh,
hey.
Following up with my question, sorry. If there is like a bunch of iframes and one is particularly like behaving badly, on a technical level, are you able to identify which of the iframes is a problem? Because then potentially you could like, in a scenario like that, replace it with a screenshot when performance becomes an issue.
Yeah, so that's That's exactly how we're thinking about it right now.
Cool.
This is a web browser. It works with Chrome browsers, optimized for Chrome browsers. We're working on a native app. So like about 95% of iframes work in the web browser, but there's still like a lot of like Gmail, Google Calendar don't work because there's a lot of restrictions around that. So we're making our own native app where 100% of iframes will work. So if you're using your native app and you're able to work across like Gmail and Google Calendar, and then you go to your web browser, it'll just have a screenshot of essentially what's working in the native app in your space. And then I think you asked about like recursion of portals. Yeah, so let me give you an example. This is something we ran into where it was just like an endless kind of like mirror portal of what was happening. So we kind of put in a fail safe. This is our Edvo resources space. So if there's like a portal of the current space that you're in, which is what this is. So this portal is like the Edvo resources card, which is the space we're in within another portal. This is what will show up.
Oh, cool.
Larry the lizard is our community mascot. So it just says, I am the alpha and the omega, all knowing, all seeing. I am Larry, lizard of learning. And that's kind of, it's just like a temporary thing for us to be like, okay, how do we want to deal with recursion? We'll just, we'll add this screenshot there for now. But it's definitely something to think about.
The I can see forever GIF, like whenever that comes up.
Yeah.
Great question, Pirijan. Yeah, there's been some comments in the chat around sort of this feels like its own like replacement for a browser, replacement for an OS, like a spatial operating system, all that kind of stuff. How are y'all on the team thinking about this? Like another way of saying that would be, where do you go from here? Like, okay, now you've got this very powerful, you got a database behind the scenes where you have all these different data types. You can then bring those into a spatial canvas and lay them out, and then you can move between canvases, and you have a very, very powerful and rich set of actions on the canvases themselves, such that you can even like work inside the canvas. What's next? Like, what are your ambitions for where to go from there? And you've given us like some of the long-term ambitions of like, interlink all data and that kind of stuff, but like, what's in the next few months for Edvo?
Yeah, so right now we kind of think of it as in 3 phases. One that's like priority is like the stability, usability, discoverability of our product. You'll notice that our toolbar is there's like 3 things in it. It's very hard to discover the different kinds of cards that you can have, like the browser cards, the portals. So we are working on just like discoverability and stability right now. What's up next? We're thinking about how do we make it even easier for people to connect the dots? So that comes in 3 steps. 1, how do we make it easier for people to bring all of their data into Edvo? Right now, you have to just singularly copy and paste things, URLs into your space, drag and drop files into your space. Can we make it easy for people to, like one feature we're working on is if you have a window, bring all of that, all the tabs in your window at once. And then how might we augment or organize that in a way for you where there isn't as much time needed to build out a space. The longest, I think, like the time to value what we're working on is that, you find a lot of value in Edvo once you're able to like work across everything in your Edvo space or build on top of the knowledge in your Edvo space, like reusing your information. But like the building part, we want to make that a lot faster. So being able to like recommend different tags, put those into different spaces based off of different trends that you're already seeing within Edvo. So we're working on those kinds of things, but also just making all the elements in Edvo more usable. So with one thing that is going to launch by the end of next week, hopefully, is what we call focus mode. So if you, for example, like I work across a lot of spreadsheets, Google spreadsheets. So if I had a spreadsheet and I'm working in Edvo, there's a lot of, we're trying to figure this out as well, but like, how do I make sure that when I'm like working in a specific iframe, I'm not accidentally zooming when I'm trying to navigate it? So what we're working on is focus mode so that you can bring it all to full screen, like all of this extraneous things that you might distract you would be removed. And then be able to use focus mode, like lasso, let's say like these 3 things, put those into focus mode and have those just like auto expand to the size of your screen. And in
That's
like the
cool.
playful way where you're able to work across all those things at once. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, the way that like full screen and split mode work in Mac OS, where you can like put 2 windows side by side, but that would be so much nicer if I could just lasso like 2 or 3 things and then hit a button and they
Right.
immediately divide it into columns for me. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
And resize those columns on the fly based on like what's in each one of those. Like, holy cow. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to like in a Google Meet where you can change the layout of how you see people. So we want to bring the playfulness of a space into focus mode where like maybe you don't want to see things in 3 columns. Maybe you want to see them like 1, 2 and like thing on the bottom or things like that. So yeah, that's like the next big feature we're working towards. And then what's next from there is being able to like take this interconnectivity you're already seeing with cards and spaces down to like your outline. So being able to link directly a topic space within your outline so that you can reference things and reuse your information within a specific note card. I think someone asked to see a note card with a text heavy note
Bill
card.
asked to see a very heavy text heavy space. Also, while you're navigating to that text heavy space, so I think he's in fact, the one that you took notes on for render was actually a pretty good example of that. You had a lot of text notes for any, like I think for 1 or 2 of the talks, you took a lot of text notes.
Yeah, so like this is an example of how you can use like there's what we call a sidecar outline on like any iframe PDF file. So you're able to take things side by side. If you were to like zoom into that even more, looks like a bug. All of
I'm
those
thinking
notes
more
should
in
be
terms of
here. So it's
taking-
more of like a split through.
I'm thinking more in terms of taking notes in the canvas as opposed to viewing a document in a canvas.
Yeah, so it might look like this is usually how I would do it. I will just like have a bunch of cards that I try to break down into different like subcategories. If like someone is like changing the topic, then I'll create a new card for it. I try to make it as like atomic as possible so that I'm able to reuse these in as many spaces. Or sometimes honestly, it's just like a giant card with a bunch of notes. And let's see if I can show you an example.
So is that like markdown inside a card, or is it?
Not yet. So we don't have markdown yet. We're working on like rich text features right now. So you're able to, use all of that. But right now it's just like simple text and you can indent bullets as much as you can. But like, for example, if I have this, I have a lot of stuff here, a lot of notes. And if I wanted to break these down even further, I can drag that, it will create a new card and I'm able to break it down. So all of those like atomic cards you saw, they didn't start like that. They were just like a big text note like this. And then I would drag and drop pieces in order to make them into different cards. So I could like, as I was synthesizing and thinking through, okay, what does this actually mean?
Super interesting. Alan asks a similar UI, kind of slightly technical question, which is, he was saying, if you wanted to follow a particular thread within an iframe, like say you had Discord and Discord has threads, which if you open a thread in Discord, like opens a column on the right-hand side of the Discord interface, could you have an iframe integration where you could like bring that thread out into a separate iframe such that that thread is in an iframe and the main Discord interface sits in an iframe? I think that's what you're saying, Alan.
Yeah, it's a bit of a thought experiment. It's more of like the pattern behind it is being able to, I don't know, if everything was an API, you could like grab only the particular parts that pertain to you or that you're interested in that moment, and then put that into a space or a canvas, as opposed to other parts of Discord conversation that might go on a different canvas.
So that's something we're actually working on right now. Is when you are like, for example, in Discord, this is like you have access to the entire channel, obviously, but if you wanted to save like a specific message in here or thread in here, what you could do is copy and then like just like paste it into another thing. That's a few more steps than we would like. So we're working on a way for you to at least, we're starting with like regular web pages. If you are like in a document and there's a bunch of hyperlinks, you want to go down those different rabbit holes, just shift clicking should open up what we call like a sibling card. So if you have this, you shift click a link, it should open a sibling card like right next to it. And then you would be able to tag that into whatever spaces you wanted from there. And this would be auto tagged back to this card so you knew where it came from. But that's something we're exploring right now with like, how do you continue those discovery paths within Edvo?
Thank you. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
Mhm.
very interesting. Let's see. I'm just scrolling back through the chat to see if there's anything else
Yeah, same.
on. Oh yes, Adam, thank you. Adam mentioned. So Darlene, do y'all have multiplayer in Edvo yet? Is that?
Yeah, we have basic multiplayer right now. Actually, we can all test this out together.
Oh
See.
boy.
I'll put it on Can Edit. I trust y'all won't put anything inappropriate in this space.
You might want to go with
I trust-
CanView.
I trust this community. There, I'll put it into CanView.
Just so people don't mess up your space, unless you had like a brand new space.
Let's see. Okay, so you will need to use like in order to like work with iframes and make them dynamic in your space, we have an extension, so you'll need to download the extension.
Oh, I was realizing that you did that. Okay, because I did
Yeah.
a bunch of work with like spatial canvases and iframes and stuff, and I was confused. Like, how is that so performant? That's impossible. An extension.
Yeah.
I also don't know how you do
Yeah.
that.
So.
But anyway. So Adam's specific question, and the reason I asked about the multiplayer, while we're all like roaming around inside your space here, Adam asked maybe Pirijan and Darlene could kind of talk about some of the experiences developing multiplayer. So like, what have you learned about having multiple people in a canvas, that kind of stuff, which is great because I don't think we really talked that much about that, Pirijan, when you were talking as well. So great prompt, Adam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, Pirijan, you can go first if you'd like.
Oh, I was gonna say like I'm thinking about it in terms of like how do you explain something so big? If there were specific questions, that'd be easier. But in the case, one of the things I found, I guess my initial target was like it just at least has to be better or equal to Trello, and that was kind of my bar. And so there's a lot of like routes you can go down with collaboration. There's lots of catchphrases, CRDTs, OT, and the rest. And Canopio uses a very naive system where it's just WebSockets that send, kind of the same events that are used internally in the app. They broadcast it to everyone who's viewing the space, and that kind of updates everyone's state at the same time. But it also uses design to kind of get over some of the downfalls of that system where, a lot of times, like let's say you're editing a card or you're editing some text together in Google Docs or even in Canopio. Ideally, you want the changes to not clobber each other and have perfect conflict resolution. The problem that I found is that a lot of those conflict resolution libraries and systems are bigger than all of Canopio itself. And I didn't necessarily want to introduce that overhead until like the technology got a lot better or until I had the time to like custom make my own implementation for some of that stuff. So what I do instead is just use design to pepper over that issue where, so one example is, let's say you're editing a card, you're typing in something, I color that card with the user color, and which kind of implies that, hey, somebody else is typing this. And naturally, I've never gotten an issue about this, but it kind of prevents other people from just wanting to type on that card at the same time. So I think there are like things you can do with design to like make up for technical shortfalls until such time that you can kind of solve all of them. But also, I think the technology is very much in infancy for Canvas specific collaboration. I think it really specializes in text doc stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, I just realized I forgot to mention this is in view mode, so you're able to add to everything. Like you can create stickies if you double click. You can add a new card by hitting the C hotkey and then clicking. But you're able to like add to the space, but no one will see the changes you made. The reason for that with our how we think about multiplayer is that whenever a space is shared with you, it's add to your database as well. So any additions, you should be able to make additions to it, build off of it without changing what the original creator has made if it's in view mode. I think one of the challenges or things that we're thinking about with multiplayer is how do you make everything still like modular from like going from like in a personal sense where you're able to build off of your own knowledge, and then in multiplayer, how are you able to build off of other people's knowledge as well, so that maybe you might be starting from scratch on your own, but if someone else was working on it, how are you able to collaborate in that way? So those are some of the things that, you know, we are thinking through right now in terms of multiplayer mode and real-time collaboration, but also getting down to like the granular details. Like I think like in Kinopio and in Edvo, you can see everyone's avatar as they're moving around. And what we're working on is kind of like similar to like in Google Docs, if we're all editing the same doc, you should be able to see your own cursors. But if anyone came to this card and like clicked in here, I wouldn't see that. So like some of those minor details that make collaboration a lot easier are some things that we're working on our like multiplayer roadmap.
Do you find that it's important for people who are like creating things that only they can see to like, for them to like know that they're creating things that only they can see, or is there some other context that kind of explains that to them?
Can you repeat that? What do you mean?
Oh,
I think what
so
he's
for
saying
example,
is
okay.
when we're creating things, we didn't know that it was just for us. Like the cards look exactly the same.
Oh yeah.
Was that on purpose, or was that
something...
just like...
No, it's there. We're thinking through how we can like let people know that like, hey, this is in view mode, like you're only creating things. To be honest, like we haven't like we added this like share feature so that we could dog food together as a team and run all of our meetings in Edvo. But there's still a lot of like user flow that we have to think through on that front. Before it's like more usable for people outside of Edvo, but yeah.
So it's interesting too, like if you extrapolate from what Darlene was just saying too, it seems like one of the things that you discovered by dogfooding this as a team is that when you had view mode, you still wanted the ability to take notes on the canvas for yourself during view mode, right? Like, so you guys ended up organically adding that feature, but there was a need, there was like a desire to annotate, like, and feeling like this static thing that I can't take notes on, even notes that are just for me, is actually really interesting. I can't think of any other tools that have that kind of like private comment feature in a collaborative interface. If anybody has any examples, I'd love to hear about them.
Yeah, and this we actually discovered through like a bug as we were making sharing. It wasn't intentional, but then when it happened, we're like, oh, this is actually kind of nice. And obviously there's a lot of things we still have to build around that, right? Like if I share this with someone and then I'm like, okay, I don't want people to have access to this anymore, what does that mean? Especially if someone has already built context, knowledge on top of that. How do you manage that? So there's still a lot of questions we're trying to figure out around multiplayer in terms of, you know, spatial canvases, but also like databases talking to each other. Like right now, when in view only, you guys can come and like tag the space to anything. Like you can include it in any of your spaces, so it's easy for you to come back to. But what if I didn't want that? You know, so we're still thinking through a lot of those questions.
That's great. Adam mentions, he's like, super helpful to hear from you guys. We don't have time to cover more now, but this is really useful as he's been thinking a lot about how spatial tools help facilitate collective thinking and co-creation. I think we could do a whole session just on that, of like how we can use spatial tools within a group to collaborate and create together. That's pretty cool. We are coming up. We got like 2 minutes left. Anybody have any last minute questions for Darlene or Pirijan? This has been really interesting. Cool. Pirijan mentions definitely feel free to ask more on Twitters, and he's got some interesting blog posts about Canopio on his website.
If you're curious about the technical specifics, or at least some of them, and some of the design thinking that's went behind it.
Yeah. Yep.
I'll
Go ahead, Alan.
just throw this out there because I think it applies to both, but I'm curious if either group is thinking about, you got the spatial canvas, but then sort of remixing, recomposing them into different, for instance, into an outline or something. Like, is there anybody working on how to go from canvas to partial outline to other kinds of presentation layers in a non-destructive way?
I think from my point of view,
I'd love to hear more
or at least from my understanding, I think the closest we have to that is OPML as a format. But the problem is OPML is limited in that it kind of assumes a tree structure, like an outline format. So it makes sense.
Right.
You want your outline to look like an outline, but in Canopio lets you make orphans, lets you, make trees that kind of encircle each other in ways that you can't represent an outline. So the problem that I find is I'd love to have OPML, but I don't know how to handle edge cases like these or what people would desire.
Yeah. The outline is really, it's a blessing and a curse. It's far too limiting for our free associations, even though it's great for DOM trees.
So part of the question, I think this is kind of like Jess's earlier point about export is not for export. So in the same way, why do you need an outline? Is it because you want to turn it into a flat PDF, of text that you share with somebody? Or like, why would you take the richness of a graph and sort of dumb it down to a flat outline? Like what need is that solving?
I can speak to that. And that's an excellent way to distinguish the problem. For me, an outline is essentially turning space into something that is a keystroke away, right? So now space is part of my design process because I can tab under and make a child, or I can make a separate note. I can add, the same way you add a horizontal line sometimes to say, okay, this is a new point to myself, and now I want to get back to the other thing that I was talking about. Graphs can help, but so can outlines. So I mean it in that very casual one-off way of writing and thinking at the same time.
Yeah, in the case of Kinopio, I've kind of tried to address some of that need in like two slight ways. One is the kind of shift enter key flow kind of adopts like how outliners work, you indent and whatever. And the other feature is that if you paint to select a couple cards in whatever arbitrary order you want, there's a copy command, and that copy command lets you just copy the text. But it's a very dumb flat format, but you can paste that into an outliner because it's like, line separated. It should do the right thing and create multiple items, but then you have to manually indent, but at least it's like a really quick kind of flow from one tool to the other.
Yeah, I love how you're thinking about it. There is a lot of promise and a lot of.
Yeah, and I think that both of these systems having sort of a fractally, nested kind of card model allows you to almost treat like a fresh outline as being transclusions of objects within canvases. And so that can get you kind of maybe close to what you're trying to do, is to sort of create a summary index gloss, map into a richer canvas. Maybe that's the way to think of it, is it something like that. And so that's where the transclusion lets you sort of dive down into whatever you need.
Yeah, while I have you here, actually, one question about OPML in general is, one of the things I'm not sure about, and this would solve a lot of my problems, is the assumption of when you make an export, you want it to be as representative and accurate as possible to the source material. But if people doing an OPML or like a 2-outliner type export have like a more like loose association, it kind of sort of looks like this tree. It's okay if things aren't necessarily in the right place, because right is hard to programmatically define, you know, on a space. Basically, I can make guesses, and if I can make guesses, then OPML is really easy. But if I can't make guesses, then it's really hard.
And if you have to go both ways, then you're really in trouble.
And both ways is, yeah, another level too. Actually, both ways, actually, from outliner in would actually be pretty easy.
Yes, because outliner has fewer degrees of freedom. So
Right,
bringing
except that
something
if
from an
you're trying to
outline into-
round trip, so if you're like starting
Well,
with the
round trip-
canvas, trying to
round trip.
project it down to an outline and then sort of get back the original canvas with its extra
It
dimension.
would be like recording on like, you know, like a cassette tape and then uploading it or re-recording.
Yep. Well, we're a couple minutes past 1:30. Pirijan and Darlene, thank you so much for prepping and coming with great commentary, and then also just all the work that you guys are doing and exploring this new medium and being willing to explore it and share what you're learning. So I think, and thanks to everybody for like really great questions and comments, as always in the chat. Much appreciated. This will be up on YouTube, and so you can feel free to share the talk with folks who maybe weren't able to make it. We'll do another one of these in a month with 2 more spatial canvases. So looking forward to more wild explorations of this new medium. So thanks, y'all.
Yeah, thanks everyone.